Hello, and welcome to the Institute for Government. Thank you to everyone in the room and those joining online for this event, How to Make a Success of Local Government Reorganisation. Thank you also to Grant Thornton for sponsoring this event. My name is Matthew Fright. I'm a senior researcher on our Devolution team. Well, last December, the government launched an ambitious new round of local government reorganisation, inviting all county, district and some unitary authorities to develop proposals for reorganisation. The government aims to simplify council structures, transform service delivery and increase efficiency by cutting duplication. This process will proceed in parallel with a second major reform initiative, the creation of mayoral combined authorities with devolved powers in areas such as transport, skills and housing. But success is by no means guaranteed. Reorganisation is a complex and time-consuming process, and by adding devolution plans increases the difficulty level even further. Today, we have published a report in partnership with Grant Thornton which draws attention to the challenges and making a number of recommendations for local leaders and central government on how they can successfully navigate the challenges of dual delivery. So, what are the benefits and risks of moving from two-tier government to unitary local government? What does past experience teach us about how to successfully reorganise local government? What level of support from central government is needed to help areas undergoing change? And how might reorganisation help to achieve the government's devolution ambitions? To discuss these topics, we will hear from our expert panel. Becky Shaw, the Chief Executive of East Sussex County Council, who will be appearing on screen imminently. Hi, Becky. Adrian Smith, Chief Executive of Nottinghamshire County Council. Eve Roodhouse, the Director of Strategy and Policy at the Local Government Association. And Philip Woolley, Partner, the Head of Public Sector Consulting at Grant Thornton UK LLP. Following opening remarks, starting with Becky, from each of our panellists, we will have a facilitated discussion before handing the microphone over to you, the audience, and hearing those questions from people online. So please do start to use Slido, which is the panel next to the screen that you're watching on. We'll now hear from our panellists on how local areas can make a success of local government reorganisation, starting with Becky.
Hi, and thanks very much for inviting me to be here today. I'm afraid I'm obviously not with you in the room, but I hope that you'll enjoy the Hastings backdrop, which you'll see behind me. In terms of opening remarks, I've got 5 to make. The first 3, though, are directed mainly at councils, but I think it's really useful and important for our friends and those working with us to know and to help us do these. Firstly, very much as in the report, it's about sustaining and creating good, respectful and honest relationships between councils, which is going to be really key. We don't need necessarily to be best friends, but we do need to be professional colleagues, and that at times of stress and strain will take some work. Secondly, I think we need to be really robust about ensuring that our focus is on the people, on the businesses, on the communities that we serve, and on improving the outcomes, not just be fixated on lines on maps, on processes and on protecting organisations. I think for me, public service reform is the most exciting part of this, but actually there is going to need to be a really repeated effort not to default to thinking about the organisations. Thirdly, we need to nurture our workforce, and I don't just mean the front line in that, I also mean our elected members and leaders right across the organisation. I think the 16th of December was an unexpected end to organisations that many people are strongly associated with and are really proud of. So we do need to allow time, space and really good engagement at an uneven pace. And we all know that even those of us who are going as fast as we can, it's probably 3 years off, so we need people to stick with us. And then 2 final thoughts, which are for councils, but they're also for the government as well. Firstly, we need to be realistic about the cost and the ability of these new organisations to deliver savings. I have absolutely no doubt there will be many benefits and certainly an increase in value for money and efficiency. But I think it's an inconvenient truth that it is very unlikely bringing organisations that have been under so much stress together, that by combining adults, children's temporary accommodation and homelessness, that it is unlikely that those those sums will balance in the end. So I think we need to be realistic about that, or the risk is people will stop trying. And then finally, I think we need to recognise the gravitational pull, both within councils and elsewhere, of local government reorganisation. I'm not a Star Wars expert, but it feels a bit like the Death Star to me is kind of hanging over us. And you can't underestimate in councils actually how much attention it's understandably drawing. But I think we need to be really clear. And actually, although I think the report's a really great read, I don't think dual delivery quite covers it. I think there are some other things as well. Of course, devolution for those of us, particularly that are in the DPP, but also, as I said earlier, public service reform. I think engaging with the government in a whole range of places where they're wanting to reform, whether that's health at a neighbourhood level, children's, adults, etc., is a fourth one. And then there is the awkward matter of service delivery, all the BAU that needs to keep on being delivered through a time when demand is driving many councils to the absolute brink, and it is shaping decision making. So I think that all of us, Whitehall colleagues, councils, we need to really recognise the profound changes involved and the impact on our capacity and our bandwidth. So it may not seem relevant to colleagues, but actually it will be shaping the response you get from all the councils involved.
Thank you for that, Becky, and thank you for outlining the many bandwidth challenges that this is posing. I suppose now, Adrian, now on to your perspective in response to the opening question.
Yeah, so I should make a career of always following Becky because she always makes such brilliant points. So I found myself going through my ticking off all of the things that I might have shared. I mean, let me get my kind of rider out first, folks, because I'm going to recognise that I hold at least 3 different perspectives on this through the conversation. So yes, I'm the chief exec of a county that's now involved in reorganisation, and I've got a certain set of obligations and responsibilities to that organisation. But I'm probably going to orientate my comments through this section and through this debate more as a public servant and someone who cares very passionately about what public services are for and about, and someone who has a personal commitment to public service. So in thinking about the topic, how do you make this a success? I think it's really hard to define success unless you think kind of temporally, because in some respects, getting to the 21st of March and submitting from an area one interim plan with one set of collectively agreed proposals would represent a massive success, but it's only the very first step on a long journey. Do you judge success about submitting something in November, or do you judge success by looking in the rearview mirror of history 5 or 10 or 15 years hence and seeing what impact you've had for people? Well, I would advocate for all of us involved in LGR and Devo that we've got to hold that long-term view in the work that we're doing and not judge success or characterise failure too prematurely. The things that I think matter to me most in terms of characterising success are very reflective of the things Becky was talking about earlier. So for me, this isn't about LGR, it's not about devolution, it is about public service reform. It has to be about rewiring the local public state, because even with us maxing out on what all of the different metrics say we might generate through efficiency of this kind of reorganisation, there is still a shortfall in the local public service finances. So we absolutely have to see public service reform, which is leveraging what we'll see through reform in children's services, leveraging what we'll see through NHS reforms and the 10-year plan and neighbourhood health service, and reimagining what a principal authority is for in the future. And that has to be about wrapping round cohorts of people with particular needs, helping them at the earliest possible stage to be independent, resilient, and to thrive, and then working with our strategic authority partners so that we see growth and opportunity and living standards rise over the long term. So for me, success will be judged in that very long term, and the only path to getting there is collaboration. So I'll pause there because I think we'll probably pick up some of the other points I might want to make through the Q&A.
Well, thank you for outlining the need for a long-term vision and for us to evaluate over the longer term. Now, Pastor Eve.
Hello everybody, my name's Eve Fruithouse and I'm the Director of Strategy and Policy at the Local Government Association, and building a little bit on wearing different hats. I'm also resident of North Yorkshire, which is an area that's gone through local government reorganisation over the past few years. And most recently, as a resident, I've been invited to shortly vote in our election for our new town council in Harrogate, since we're an unparished area. So it's quite interesting being a resident, living through some of that, as well as a policy position. For those of you that are a bit less familiar with the Local Government Association, we're a membership association, and we are politically led and cross-party. So we build consensus across all of the parties, which of course is an interesting time when you are dealing with something as controversial as local government reorganisation. But collectively we exist to strengthen local government so that communities can thrive, and we aim to champion and be the voice of local government, making sure that local government has the right powers, the resources and the support that it needs to be a success. And so it's really important that we are at our best working for our membership at this moment. Just as our membership is diverse, we have well-established unitary councils that are part of our membership alongside two-tier areas and those that have gone through reorganisation recently. So are the opinions that we hear from our politicians around LGR and Devo. And at the LGA, we respect each of those views and each of the choices that are being taken equally. But that's why it's really important to us that areas have the kind of room to be able to negotiate and discuss with central government about what is right for them around the sizing and approach to local government reorganisation. And from our perspective, it's really important that the decisions are made on a really sound evidential basis in terms of having the very best data to hand about population, around council tax base and revenue base, because the new unitary councils that are created through this process need to be in a position where they can be sustainable into the future. And if we don't get this right in what's referred to in the report as the preparation phase, then the implementation and the operation of these organisations that we're going to be creating is going to be, really tough. And that's where, the lessons that we've heard from councils that we've supported through local government reorganisation is really important to take into account at this stage. What we hear is that the costs can be between 25 million and 100 million in terms of getting through that reorganisation. The complexities at looking at all of the workforce challenges around 2P transfers or restructuring your organisation. It take a long time to work through and are very resource intensive. And again, that's why we're underlining for our members the importance of asking government where is the money coming from to fund the reorganisation, to make sure we have the capacity in what's already a stretched system, not just to do the structural change, but to be able to have the opportunity to lead that public sector reform agenda and the transformation that we know that local government is really well placed to deliver. It's really important to our members as well that local services are protected through local government reorganisation, both statutory services and non-statutory services. We need to make sure that kind of as we move through this, there isn't a perception that this is a solution to the demand that we're seeing for social care and SEND and other service areas. We have to remember that we need to continue to make the argument for a fair financial settlement for local government across the board in order that we can also have that capacity to redesign and work with. And local government has already done a huge amount of redesign on some of those service areas and has the capacity to do it. Our members are also really clear that the voices of local councillors and leaders need to be really strong and appropriately reflected in the governance and scrutiny of devolved government arrangements, making sure that political balance is reflected, which won't be surprising for you to hear from me. And as we move forwards as well, we need to make sure that on the broader devolution agenda, the place-making role that councils play, their ability to help deliver economic growth is not overshadowed by the new roles around mayors and strategic authorities. Strategic authorities will not be able to deliver growth and major economic change without effective effective councils. So finally, just to say, obviously the Local Government Association also does a huge amount of work on providing improvement support and advice to councils who go through the journey. And so we kind of also see it as being really vital that councils, both leaders and officers, get that support to be able to deliver the systems leadership that's going to be needed over a long-term basis, and that we're able to retain the workforce that we need and to recruit the workforce we need as we go through this transition, and that collectively we keep making the case for local government being a really exciting and rewarding place to work.
Thank you very much, and thank you for outlining the many challenges that are facing the sector at this time and drawing out those themes as flagged in our report about the multifaceted challenge that local leaders are needing to face. Phil, your thoughts?
So my checklist is pretty threadbare now, given Adrian's comments before. So Grant Thornton as a firm, obviously we work extensively in the consulting frame, but also around audit assurance as well in local government. So we've supported a range of authorities going through local government reorganisation and also reviewed the results of and successes of previous waves as well. Most of our commentary on local government in recent years has been around the sustainability of the sector, principally in financial terms, or the lack of sustainability in the sector. And the sector has obviously been calling out for a reset. And LGR provides an opportunity to address some of that reset. And I think the process that the government has brought forward does provide an interesting range of opportunities, but also presents a really difficult challenge, as Becky has alluded to. So the opportunity is definitely there to address some of the financial challenges and also some of the challenges around sustainability, and particularly things like workforce, which we see as a really acute challenge, particularly across the districts, and also the strategic authorities coming in and the potential for unlocking growth there. What we would say from the work that we've been doing so far around LGR is authorities really need to try and get beyond now those sort of initial questions of how many and how big, and trying to second guess elements of the criteria. And as Eve has alluded to, really come forward with proposals based on a very strong evidence base. So the new unitaries are really built on the strongest foundations possible, with really strong potential for those areas. So a lot of the work we're involved in is looking at that evidence base, looking at the capacity of those potential future authorities, both in terms of financial sustainability, but also potential for the future, and how that potential can be unlocked both in terms of transformation and economic growth as well. So all the points around challenging project management, delivery, the scale of cost of transition will be really acute. And one of the things that I think will be key to success is sort of framing that investment ask in each of the areas, because investment will be required to unlock the transformation opportunities. And I think that's something slightly missing from the government guidance at the moment. So there's lots in the criteria about minimum, recommended size, scope for efficiency savings, but actually what is the investment ask in each area to really unlock that improvement. So they're the sort of key points, I think, building on the comments of colleagues that we bring to the fore.
Well, thank you. That's really helpful. And perhaps a follow-up to that, you sort of mentioned about the fact that the government has clearly laid out a series of criteria that areas are now working through as they draw their proposals together, and hopefully using that to inform realistic proposals. Are there any further actions you think the government can be doing in this space to help steer that so they are realistic proposals coming towards the table?
I think it will be interesting to see what develops in this area. So the level of guidance is, I think, as clear as it probably can be up to this March 21 submission. But then when those proposals land, And it'll be interesting to see what government is going to do with those, particularly if they receive more than one proposal from a particular area. Is then one selected to go through, or do multiple, is there the opportunity for multiple submissions in September? So I think more clarity needs to emerge out of that type of process. If we get into a process on the guidance where you can have competitive bids, what would make, I think, us nervous from what we've seen in previous rounds of LGR is that the business cases then become a competitive process where people will over-egg the opportunity for savings, efficiency savings, etc. And a lack of realism could creep into some of the proposals that come forward if you have that element of competition. So I think as the picture emerges, additional guidance will have to follow about assessment criteria, how government will be looking at the realism around some of the business cases coming forward based on previous practice, etc. So I think that is bound to follow, Matthew.
No, thank you. That's helpful. And obviously, you've highlighted the risk of potentially over-egged estimates as something that came out of the previous waves of local government reorganisation. Eve, I was wondering, with sort of an LGA hat on, what you would see as sort of the greatest challenges that you've seen in previous rounds, and are there any real practical steps that leaders can take now to manage them?
Yeah, so our team at the moment are doing a lot of work with the councils that have been through local government reorganisation to make sure that we've captured the lessons from them and that we can share them with other councils. To give you an example of how we're doing that, at the moment we've got our digital and cyber team doing a kind of set of discovery work with those councils saying, you know, what did you plan around your digital and technology transition? Did you kind of plan enough? What have you learned from that? What's the lessons for the future? And we're going to convert that into kind of really practical support for councils going through LGR to be able to take advantage of that. So that's one example, but we're looking at across a range of areas to make sure that we're picking up on findings from both formal engagement with councils like peer reviews. So again, just for those that are less familiar with the LGA, we have a process of peer review where we review councils and their performance and support them through local government reorganisations. You can have a peer review before vesting day and then afterwards and support you along the way. And that, again, is all about bringing the learning from different areas into account. But as I said in my opening comments, I think the key thing is it goes back to sort of trying to make sure you've got really realistic and sound data at the start, because the costs, as I say, we've heard indicated between 25 million and 100 million to get through that transition. And then within that, if you are going to have to fund that yourselves from your own reserves, if you're in an area where you're sort of proposing change and you might have another council in that area that's already in financial difficulty, the negotiation with central government for your area is going to be really important about how to achieve that. And it appears central government want to do that on a case-by-case basis rather than sort of setting a precedent out at the outset. So again, in that next phase, having that really robust data and evidence case to be able to make a sound kind of agreement with central government, particularly one that isn't going to jeopardise residents' positions in the future in terms of service delivery in those areas, I think.
Particularly given your comments on the need for good data in this space and also the need for realism, I suppose it'd be useful to hear your thoughts on the audit backlog and whether that's going to be posing a unique challenge on this particular round of local government reorganisation from both of you.
Yes. And it's referred to in a previous report that we've written on the lessons learned of LGR. There'll be a significant number of authorities coming into this process without audited accounts. So naturally then the reliance that you can place on some of the underpinning financial resilience of those entities is going to be really challenging. What you tend to see as well, where there has been an absence of audit, systems and processes become weaker, controls become weaker. So that's not a great background into which you take a process as complex as this, where you bring in complex organisations together. So that is incredibly unhelpful, I think.
And there's remember the complexity here. You've got to think about local government pension scheme as well, for example, which is another kind of layer of the financial complexity looking at, which could be an opportunity, because we could look at how local government pension schemes are kind of overseen in the future. Or it could just be another challenge. So there's layer upon layer, and this is why it's really good to be able to have councillors through some of our boards that are experts in these areas at helping uncover these things, which then allow us to be able to go to government with some of those issues on behalf of our membership.
Definitely. Before turning to Becky to ask a question on service transformation, I just want to remind those who are watching online, do please keep questions coming in. We will be turning to your questions in the room and questions online very soon. So, Becky, I wanted to ask, a core component of this, as you flagged in your opening remarks, is a desire to transform how local government services are being delivered. So how can local leaders actually go about delivering on these broader government ambitions to transform services for residents, while also ensuring there's a minimum level of, there's a guaranteed quality public service that's being delivered to the public?
I mean, I think the core thing, and it's Adrian's point about sort of focusing relentlessly on the people that we serve and using the data, is that just actually when you start pulling together, rather than in the case of East Sussex, the data across 6 councils, it's all being sort of homed in one place, it will mean that the really strong relationships that we have, particularly with the NHS, for example, in East Sussex, given the demographic of our sort of population, can be really put to work. Again, I think in terms of housing is another classic area. There's a huge amount of investment in failure at the moment, just because of the way in which there's the interaction of children's social care and housing responsibilities sit. Of course, and some of those have got, some of the boroughs and districts have got stock, and others have, it's being transferred. So I think that just that much closer focus on what is it that people are receiving, and then being able to work, for example, with DWP in terms of tackling the poverty in East Sussex will enable a real step change. I think the other thing that I would enable, I think, as we all think increasingly about digital and the use of AI, again, it's just with fewer players in the system, then we should be able to make faster progress.
Okay, thank you. And final question, we're going to come to you, Adrian. So if everyone else in the room, do please prepare questions and keep those questions coming in online. Becky was sort of talking about, we were just having a conversation about the transformation that's potential in terms of local government services, but obviously, as flagged in the introduction, this is a devolution revolution as well underway, to use Angela Rayner's phrase. So how do you think local leaders can ensure the government's broader ambitions for durable strategic authorities? And what lessons, particularly in the example of the East Midlands, do you think that other areas can draw on as they start to develop plans for both local government reorganisation and devolution at the same time?
Yeah, no, thank you. I mean, let's not underestimate the scale of the task of, I agree with Becky, I think it's more than dual delivery. It's your trilemma, I think, plus, isn't it, as the report says. And having lived through, the two and a half years of creating the East Midlands Combined Authority in partnership with our colleagues in the patch, that was an enormous endeavour. Doing that with LGR is tough, but colleagues in your part of the world in Yorkshire have definitely demonstrated it's possible, it can be done. And I think again, if you just kind of zoom out and think about what local government and its partners are good at, it's delivering when times are challenging. So I would have every confidence that the colleagues can make it work. I think the things that I would draw out of the experience of creating the Combined Authority in the East Midlands, firstly, and many of these things will probably help people on the LGR journey, because you are required to step into the space of thinking about building a new institution from scratch. And that actually isn't just a big challenge, but it's enjoyable, it's exciting, it's an opportunity, isn't it, to create something, not just have to change something. I think it naturally brings people into the space where they think and act for their places rather than their institutions or their own organisation, because you come into this room as constituent partners and you are compelled to work for MCA. We were compelled to work at scale. So I think being able to think and act for the whole area rather than just the council that you are employed by, it's practice, and it's good for LGR and for devolution. I think one of the things that's challenging is changing the muscle memory. So, we particularly in that kind of growth, economic development, regen space, we've had kind of 15 years of working in a particular way, which has obviously often been about bidding for funds. If strategic authorities are to be impactful and change the trajectory of kind of socioeconomic outcomes, they've got to break out of that, which also means the partners need to break out of that muscle memory too. So building a new culture, building a new way of working, it brings the kind of system leadership, the place leadership models really to the fore. But I think, again, that's something that's compelling. It's exciting to do. And if anything, doing that for Devo at the same time as reorganisation, I think will equip people with a kind of skill set and a mindset and a framework that will help. But I think one of our core ingredients for success was yes, the collaboration, but it was the extent to which, as members of the member landscape changed, as politicians came and went through elections, or as it was members of the kind of management and leadership teams came and went, we built the consensus and then nurtured that consensus and then rebuilt the consensus, and we paid particular attention throughout that Devo journey to make sure that we didn't lose focus on what the long-term goal was we were trying to achieve. And again, those feel like lessons very much transferable to the reorganisation question. But I think this particular question for me is provocative because it takes us back to thinking about what is a strategic authority, what is a principal authority. Those don't have to be, remapping what unitary councils have been in the past into the future. It gives us an opportunity to think differently, to unfreeze some of the models that we've had in the past, and to, do that rewiring I talked about, actually kind of reimagine what local public services could be, and the benefits of having blank page type institutions for combined authorities or strategic authorities and new councils going forward should allow us to, design something that works for the next 50 to 100 years, and not just try and recreate what we've had over the last 50 years.
Brilliant, thank you. That's a very helpful pitch in terms of where areas should be thinking for how to ground future combined authorities. And very much, I see my boss, Akash Pound, in the audience, who would want me to flag after the Devo Deal report, which covers some of these themes on how areas can go about starting to think about creating that space for discussion, how to project forward, and yes, define a new tier of government in their local area. I suppose before opening to questions from the floor, I'd just be curious to hear your thoughts about sort of the bandwidth risk, because obviously, as you flagged earlier, there's the trilemma. You're trying to deliver public services, you're trying to come up with new proposals for unitary authorities, and also just keep things ticking over, whilst then also on top of that creating new strategic authorities. Is there a way of sort of mitigating some of that?
Crikey. Well, one, it's got to be done, hasn't it? I think if anything, the resilience of the sector is when it has to be done, we make it so. And we've got a huge number of really talented, skilled and ambitious people in our sector, the length and breadth of it. And if we can create an environment where those people, those leaders, those aspiring leaders across all of our different organisations can be freed up to do this work, it's thoughtful, diligent work, then yes, we have the capacity and capability. I think it's if we retreat to the kind of combative or the attritional type approach, that's where it's going to get incredibly difficult. So for me, the thing that I've cherished most about the work we've done, both on devolution but more latterly on reorganisation in my patch, is that I'm working with a group of colleagues and partners who are nurturing that working environment so that our colleagues, our teams, our joint team can do good work. But I don't underestimate it. I think we do need to invest in the capacity. I think we do need to invest in the skills. And the particular challenge, I think, is going to be around the leadership and the resilience of leaders to be able to navigate a path through that. So again, it's really encouraging that sector bodies and others are investing in and creating the space for that investment in people.
Yeah, we have agreed to convene a group around the support that's needed for the sector across all of our partners. So Solace, who the organisation that represents chief execs in local councils, district councils network, core cities, others, and coming together just to think about how that all that support can really complement one another and make sure the sector gets the support it's needed. But can I bring it back to the resident as well before we open the floor? Because the other thing that I was just reflecting on as we were all talking is what we're describing as some really complex things. And if you're in an area as a resident where maybe you're going to go through LGR and through devolution, how do you get the messages across to residents where you already have quite low turnout and engagement in local elections that you want them to go out and vote for councillors who might be kind of sitting on a new council in the next election, or for your mayor, or for a new town council, as I explained at the beginning? And how do you explain the difference and the different roles? And we must sort of remember in all of this the importance of really good communication. And again, you know, at the LJ we'll do all we can to build toolkits and support our members to be able to do that, but not to underestimate the effort that's required by our elected members as politicians and by our kind of officers working across local government that in having to explain all of this as we go to residents too.
And again, just certainly before just opening to the floor, just following up on that, obviously there's sort of communication component that you're drawing attention to there, but is there also an engagement component? And perhaps this is questions both for Becky and for Adrian in terms of how are you trying to, the government's made a very big steer on the criteria about engagement so that people are being drawn into this exercise. Can you give a couple of quick examples before we open to the floor of ways in which you're trying to do that? Becky first.
And I think the first thing to say is I'm not sure that residents do care about structures or about maps. So certainly the work that we're doing in East Sussex, we will consult our residents and a wide range of people about what is it they want from their council, how do they want the community engagement to work, how do they want to be able to access people, rather than asking them questions just about what the footprint should be like, because I think we're a bit sceptical about their ability to kind of answer that question. And in terms of and it's also making really, really good use of the existing partnerships that we've got. So we have got, whether that's the senior forums, whether that's the Children in Care Council, all of that kind of stuff. We need to really use that, and go to where people are to have the conversations with them, rather than creating new forums and trying to draw them into it. The other thing I just would say while I'm on is I think that the government's got a really important role to play and could really help us by being really as clear as they can be about the rules of the framework. And I give you an example. Although the white paper talks very clearly about 500,000, there's an enormous amount of speculation about what the exceptionally smaller means. And I would hope, and it's really part of what Philip said, I would really hope that as people put their interim plans in March, that the government will be able and brave enough to say, do you know what, don't work up 16 options. Those are the three that you could, just because there's the danger of there being a huge amount of work, which everybody really knows isn't going to come to anything, but will make people feel that they've tried as hard as they can, is really significant.
Thank you, Becky. And Adrian?
Yeah, I mean, as Eve was talking, I was reminded of the period when we were doing consultation on the establishment of EMCA, and
that's the East Midlands Combined County Authority.
Combined
County
Authority,
Authority,
yeah.
Thank you, yes.
And we were saying publicly that this new institution was going to have £4 billion of extra money to invest in our place, at the same time as individual councils were consulting on their budgets, saying collectively we're going to be cutting X, Y or Z and reducing our budgets by several £1 million. It wasn't a surprise that residents and businesses were saying we can't understand how these two things reconcile. So, just to acknowledge there's an inherent tension in this, particularly if you're doing it at the same time. But I think, like Becky said, you've got to use all of the existing mechanisms and routes into communities, and elected members have got an enormously important role to play, notwithstanding it's tricky when you've got elections in a few weeks' time. But I think, partners locally, there hasn't been the time to do detailed and comprehensive consultation from the 16th of December to the 21st of March. I'd anticipate there'll be an awful lot of that engagement happening over the summer.
Thank you very much. So we now open to questions from the floor. I should remind those people online that please do submit your questions via Slido. It's the screen. It's to the panel to the left-hand side, to the side of the screen. There'll be a roving mic that's going to be going around the room now. Please, can you wait for the microphone before asking a question? Say who you are, what organisation you're from, and if anybody's in the room next door, please do come through to the door, and we'll get questions from there. So, without further ado, are there any questions in the room? So, can I go hit gentleman on the right-hand side first, and the one at the back, sorry, I didn't see the hand. One at the front, sorry. One at the front, please, and then to the gentleman on the left-hand side after. Thank you.
Thank you. Ed Hammond from the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny. Evening, everybody. Just wanted to ask the panel if you could expand a little bit on the comments that a couple of you made about the kind of cultural challenges and opportunities associated with this, the points that some of you made about muscle memory, durability, and around public service reform, how we can create new attitudes and mindsets around how we work with each other as part of creating these new institutions, around new assumptions and ways of working around decision-making, accountability, how we can actually do that and get away from the risk that we end up degenerating back into just creating new old-style institutions.
Thank you.
Hi there, San Abishev, Chief Executive, Blue Swallow Group. So 70% of the country is already served by the unitary authorities, and the direction of travel seems to be towards unitarization. But is there any merit in the logic that some of the remaining 30% may have kept their two-tier system because they are better served and better catered due to their individual needs and unique circumstances? And if so, is there a threat that in the pursuit to unitarization we may install larger, more centralized structures in places which need more nimble and targeted organizations? Thank you.
And any more questions at this stage? Or in which case I will overlay another question of my own, which is, we've sort of spoken before about relationships on this panel and the need to get a consensus. I suppose, do any of the panelists have advice on how to navigate fractious relationships? There's obviously a lot of personal interest from different districts, from different counties in this space, and you could imagine scenarios where people start to end up with quite difficult relationships. So how do you go about navigating? So questions for all the panelists. I'll come to each of you in turn, see which ones you want to take up. The first one was on how do we embed new cultures. The second one on actually is there a logic and benefit to retaining some forms of two-tier? And then the third one is how do you navigate fractious relationships? So starting with Phil.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just writing the last question down. So I'll deal with the last question first, which was yours, Matt, wasn't it? So fractious relationships, that's an interesting one. I was discussing with colleagues earlier whether part of the sort of government package of support might be mediation services between parties in particularly fractious areas. I think ultimately each of the areas have got to realise that it's just a destructive process if there was a continuation of a sort of fractious environment in which they were trying to develop proposals. Because, and I heard this comment made in a council meeting where these issues were being debated with a number of councils obviously present. The decision and approvals don't actually happen in that room. So it's the responsibility of the councils in that area to put the best foot forward for the residents in that area. And if that's done through a fractious prism, that doesn't serve the needs of the residents. And I think there will be that sort of storming phase as relationships are developed, and I think Becky alluded to it earlier. But ultimately, I think you would hope that people would focus on the end game and the end goal, and actually presenting a cogent set of proposals and a business case that's going to pass muster with the department, ultimately Treasury, is going to require a degree of collaboration and joint working that would hopefully resolve those types of issues. But, obviously that it's something that needs to be recognised as a significant risk and managed through the process.
Thank you. Eve?
So I'm interested in the question around muscle memory and kind of how do you change cultural ways of working and so on. So I think it won't surprise you that I personally think, and the LJ's view as well, is that we really need to pay attention to what the sort of scrutiny and accountability structures will be for the new devolution arrangements in place, because those structures need to be clear in order that accountabilities are clear, in order that you can then understand how you're meant to be working together on key areas like strategic planning, for example. And some of those details are not yet clear. And so as more detail emerges, we'll continue to sort of build an opinion and a view about how we think those things might need to work, and then sort of influence and work with central government around that based on sort of the views that we form with our membership. But ultimately, governance and structures like that are only ever an enabler. Done right, governance basically creates clear accountability, but allows you to have the freedom to be empowered to make things happen for residents. And so my experience of working at Leeds City Council as part of, with the West Yorkshire Combined Authority on Economic Growth is that it always comes back to relationships, And so at the very beginning, before you even elect your mayor, you've got to sort of start thinking through how you want to work together, both your politicians and your officers. And I suppose I would say, given that I was not a chief executive in Leeds, that needs to involve lower levels of officers as well, because you need to be involving your directors and your assistant director levels, because they're the ones that are going to be working practically every day with that combined authority around delivering some of those core services, whether it's employment and skills, whether it's planning, whether it's transport. And so the more you can invest in kind of really setting and agreeing principles about how you want to operate together, the better. And Becky was touching earlier as well about, the broader relationships, how are you going to work with the NHS in that context? When the NHS is going through a huge amount of change and there is a huge dependency between the NHS and local authorities and increasingly combined authorities, which will be strategic authorities. So the answer as ever is a complex one, which is you've got to focus on getting the governance, right and appropriate, but not make it so constraining that you become obsessed with process and not with relationships and outcomes. And then you've just got to have really strong systems leaders that are investing constantly in trying to maintain strategic alignment so that you can get the delivery happening. And then, if I may, on the fractious relationships point, we have a family in the local government association that has a range of views, and so we have seen a range of emotions and a range of kind of exchanges over the past few months since the Devolution white paper was published. But what we've got to do is as you were saying, is focusing on our residents, and our chair, Councillor Louise Gittins, always comes back to that. So it's got to be about what's right for residents. And above all else, elected members are ultimately quite good at coming back to that, because residents are the ones that elect them. So they do have to ultimately keep them in mind.
Now, Adrian, I think if I was to ask you whether Nottinghamshire is well run, I think that we'll probably have an inevitable answer to that. So maybe, perhaps paraphrasing that slightly, are there ways in which, where there are successful examples of good delivery of services or good operations of councils, are there ways in which that could be transformed and retained and maybe embedded into the culture, the question that was asked by Ed?
Yes, so I'm going to try and bridge, and I think I'll try and touch on your question as well. Forgive me that I didn't catch all of it because I was too excited by the first question. But I'll see if I can kind of pull some of those things together. So yes, I think if we're going to imagine what these new principal authorities are going to look like, they've got to blend the strengths and the best of all of the institutions that you've currently got in the patch. And I think, as well as what you were saying about that, the role that senior leaders have got to play, we'll create an environment, for this stuff to happen. But for me, the work can start now, particularly around that public service reform work. And so how can we invite practitioners into a shared space across, whether it's the two tiers and or with the strategic partners, to start to reimagine how they can better support the people in our communities as effectively as possible. So, when I go out and talk with colleagues in some of our social care services, they'll regularly say, well, we work within a framework, and then we need to go and we need to, we've got a referral pathway, and then we'll go and talk with our district and borough partners who might have another assessment framework around eligibility. And then we'll go and we'll work with health, who've got their own referral pathway and assessment process. Like if we can start to bring those practitioners into a shared space and allow them to wrap around individuals, families, communities, and help co-design services that will be better for those people, and then we translate it back into policy, right? So, that's the test, learn, grow stuff that we know is emergent through the public service reform. And for me, that's what's got to guide some of our thinking then around what these new principal authorities become. And I think then it is about then wrapping policy and governance and all those important things around it to make sure it works and endures. And so without offering a judgment about what's good, bad or indifferent about two-tier, or, I've worked in two-tier, unitary, London, all different contexts, without offering a judgment there, what we need to do now, given we've got a white paper and a very clear direction of travel from government, is paint a picture that's compelling. I mean, I think in my patch, we must have more than 20-odd thousand public servants working in the local government family across district, borough, county, city. I don't want those people thinking, well, we're doing this because we're being told to. I want them thinking we're doing this because we can make stuff better for the people that we serve. So irrespective of where we've been, the business case, the strategic case for change has to be anchored in, we're going to reimagine how we provide public services to the people who need it most in our communities. And working with our strategic partner, we're going to make sure that we see growth, living standards, opportunities improve for people in a not insignificantly deprived part of the East Midlands. So I think that's how we bridge, starting today. We don't need to wait for consent orders and reorganisation. We can do that now. We can practice, start changing the muscle memory, build that new culture and make it compelling for people so that they own the journey that we're going to go on.
And Becky, culture, two-tier or...
Thank you. So on culture, I would just say, I agree with what's been said, and I think we must remember what we already know, which is that we ought to start our questions about what is it that our residents, our public, our businesses need. We give time to debate to get the question right, because I think we quite often leap over that bit far too fast. Really, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And then we put all the amazing collaborative, creative juices that flow in public service, and particularly in councils, to solving that problem. And that will get us not to a new institution, but different and better ways of working. In terms of the second question about two tiers, I think it's really interesting if people have had a chance to look at the consultation for those areas that are in the DPP, because actually that gives some more detail on what was in the white paper. And it is clear to me that actually what's envisaged about mayors in future is very different to the mayors that we've currently got. So it's not a case of the rest of the country catching up. It's a different thing. And actually in that different thing, there is some really significant drawing up of powers from local government. So I think one of the questions that we need to be asking is, from whence are things being devolved? I don't know can you have upwards devolution? Probably not. But I think we need to be clear about that. And I suppose in that context, I think the question about do you keep two-tier, actually you'd be moving then to three-tier, and quite possibly in rural areas where you've got parishes and town councils, 4 tiers, and whether that passes a test of being sensible for people, I think is really questionable. And in terms of the fractious relationships, I think it's recognising that there are some really inherent tensions in the system. And I think the government can make a really major contribution, I say, about minimising the uncertainty. So there isn't, the gaming is minimised, and also some honesty about the money. But I think for people who are working in it, it just requires kind and generous but firm leadership that's got some really clear feedback loops. So there's a strong connection between the consequences of action and action.
Now, thank you very much, Becky. I'm afraid time's running short, so you probably have time for at most one quick question. If anyone has a burning question they want to ask. Checking the room. Gentleman in the middle, you had your hand up first. And if you could wait for the microphone first and then say who you are and where from. And as concise as possible, please. Okay. We've got minutes left.
Peter Cleesby, and I'm not from an organisation. We've heard a lot about large authorities. Have the panel any thoughts about how the communities are going to engage with councillors and indeed with officers in these large authorities, when they're, so many of them are used now to, say, districts where they know lots of people?
That's very, very helpful. Thank you very much. So how can new, larger unitary authorities engage with their residents? Who wants to come in on that one? Is there a sign from Becky or from Adrian?
So I would say I would offer two things. One of which is there's a huge amount of really brilliant learning from places that have already done it. So I mean, we are really blessed, and we need to draw on that. But I think we also just need to make sure. I mean, boroughs and districts and counties have both got huge amounts of mechanisms, and we need to put all of those together. I think sometimes this gets kind of portrayed as an either or. I think it's both.
And perhaps maybe I could come to you, Eve, to talk about maybe a little bit of the North Yorkshire experience as well.
Yeah. Well, I don't.
Yeah.
So
Sure,
you've kind of put me on the spot.
Oh,
About personal experience
Sorry.
talking to my councillors. I suppose I would just make an observation around. Let's be sort of careful that we don't suggest that there's any kind of democratic deficit in places like Leeds, where there's a population of 812,099 councillors, and it's a very effective council compared to other areas. So we need to be careful when we're talking about this, that we don't suggest that there's any difference between a councillor that works in, you know, one part of the country to another. You know, councillors all work really, really hard for their residents, regardless of how many residents they serve. So let's just be careful about some of that and making reflections on it. And then sort of, I guess, interestingly, from a personal perspective, where I live, they are creating a town council because there's obviously a view that there needs to be a way for the town where I live to be able to have a more direct engagement with politicians in that way. And I think that is for local discussion, right? So one of the things that our elected members have asked us to talk to work with NowCon is to just sort of have that discussion about what does the white paper mean when it's talking about communities, and what's the role of town and parish councils in relation to unitaries, and how should this work out? And the honest answer is there'll be different answers for different places based on rurality, based on what the blend is going to be. So I guess that's a sort of roundabout way of giving you a view.
Thank you. And Phil, you caught my eye, so you can get the very last comment before we wrap things up.
I was just going to refer to a section in your report.
Why, thank you.
Which talks about the case study in North Yorkshire and the locality boards and processes like that. I think, as Becky's alluded to, there's lots of case studies and learning around those sorts of engagement channels. And I guess you could argue that, you know, having a single councillor that you're engaging with across all the spectrum of local government services is more straightforward than a district councillor and a county councillor, depending on, you know. So, yeah, really good case studies in the report.
Thank you very much for that, Phil, and thank you for the plug there too. So with that note, I'm going to draw things to a close. Thank you for the questions from the floor and from the really stimulating discussion from the panellists. We will have a video and sound recording available on the IFG website and YouTube shortly after this event. If you can't wait that long, you can go online and go and access our report, as Phil was just mentioning earlier. I just wanted to mention we have an upcoming report next Tuesday from 3 o'clock till 4 o'clock. This will feature Local Government Minister Jim Mahan joining an expert panel to discuss the reforms that are needed to help mayoral combined authorities drive regional growth, alongside Chief Executives to the West Midlands Combined Authority and East Midlands Combined County Authority. I've probably got County Combined Authority. I always slip them up, sorry. Thank you again to Grant Thornton for sponsoring this event. And finally, could we give a round of applause to thank our panellists for their contributions.